Can you
Mm,
dissect a little bit
sure.
what the traditional roles? There's so many pieces that I want to extrapolate from
Oh,
everything
yeah.
that you've said, but the more traditional roles of a man and of a woman and what that looks like, and also what the roles that we see in society where the inversions come into play
Sure.
really look like.
Okay. So, how I teach um, polarity. So, let's use that kind of like um, that frame for now. Um, we know it as the masculine and the feminine in the polarity space, like being in the feminine, being in the masculine, and integrating both within you and then in your relationship. That's also how it looks like in traditional gender roles. It's just that, this term of traditional gender roles has kind of like a dichotomous, like, feel to it because of the genesis of that particular term. So, John Money, they consider him the father of gender ideology. He actually coined the phrase gender roles. And so, that in and of itself has distortion already, even if it is used in the traditional space to define this is what a man does and this is what a woman does. So, I just want to point that out so that we also have a context for what we may be colluding with unconsciously, right? So I don't use the term gender roles personally, though on the top side world, when you look at my relationship with my husband and when I look at the relationship I had witnessed first as a marriage, which was my own parents, they did practice these so-called gender roles. So typically, this looks like a male provider figure, meaning the man or the husband. And then there is a female recipient figure. So this is the resourcer, the housewife, the one who, if you extrapolate like a 1950s dynamic, he would be the husband going to the office, and she would be the wife who would receive his salary and kind of manage it with the household. This was the dynamic of my grandparents, right? So my grandfather was a lawyer. My grandmother had 8 children, but she would receive, like in my culture, I don't exactly know if this is the same in American or Western culture, but in my culture, the woman would receive his entire salary, and he would ask her, okay, you allot what I have worked hard for. So my grandmother would give my grandfather kind of like a budget. And like, oh, here is, with what you brought in for the family, here is, where we will distribute everything. So this was like a very like obvious gender role assignment of tasks and functions. So if you can see the male, the husband, the patriarchal figure goes out into the world, works hard, and then brings everything home income wise for the wife to assess and like redistribute to create the home. That is the typical traditional gender role dynamic. So that was in the 1950s. Like literally, my grandmother was a 1950s housewife. You fast forward it to today, um, there are still elements of that, but because like we've evolved quite rapidly in humanity with a lot of ideologies and narratives and oh my gosh, like the psychology world alone, right, brings in so many layers of how to navigate your humanity. Like now it is atypical sometimes to see that dynamic, especially like in Western culture, which was the birthplace of egalitarianism, right? And so now you might see more androgynous, polarity wise relationships, 50-50 relationships where the husband and the wife or partners, they don't have to be married. Um, it's almost unconscious that they will go 50-50, that all the expenses will be cut in half. It'll be very like much a agreement of, you have this, you take care of that, I'll handle this. You don't have a say in how I handle that because that's my money and that's your money and all of the things, right? It's very different now because we're navigating all the progress that we have made. And I say progress sometimes in air quotes when I talk, because there are, like benefits to all that has happened, but there are also at the same time costs that are paid to accrue those benefits. One of the things that I particularly am passionate about in my work is helping women to remember their potency as women before the whole sexual revolution came in and implanted, like that's a very specific word, implanted ideas about what women could do and what they should do. This was also the time when the term gender roles was coined, right? When the sexual revolution came around, the term gender roles was coined by the infamous John Money. And he perpetuated the idea that, because these are just roles, we can switch roles, right? And then the feminists, it just became all one huge amalgamation of what we could have and what we couldn't have, and we can have it all without the key piece. Well, we're still male and female. We're still male and female, and a woman, a female, will never know the experience exactly of a man, of a male, and a male and a man will never know exactly the experience of a female and a woman. And sometimes I joke about this with my husband, like when it's something just so viscerally male or female. He's like, and it usually has something to do when you're talking about those parts down there, right? Like, um, like sex, for instance. I don't know what it's like for a man to have an orgasm, just like he doesn't know what it's like for me, for a woman to have like it goes down to that
Yeah.
particular like dynamic that makes us so opposite from each other. Bring that out into the world space of work, business, finances, the roles that we get to play with now in society, like how women can be CEOs and men can be CEOs. Bring it up to the top side world, and it is still also the same thing. As a woman, even if I'm a CEO, I will never know what it's like, the male experience of life as a male CEO. We tend to not look at that, but
Yeah.
there are profound differences with how men and women experience life, right? And this is kind of what I sit in spaces with women, and recently with men too, right? Because I've started to mentor couples, married couples as well. And it's really interesting how when we start to appreciate biological polarity, like fundamental truth polarity, that it all makes sense. It's kind of, we remember who we are. And there's that guiding verse in the book of Genesis in the Bible, male and female, he created them, meaning there's two different entities that produce and propagate life, not just literal life, but also in like the world of what we are right now, like our modern world. There are still going to be masculine and feminine energetics at play at all times in every space, whether it's in the physical, biological realm and in like the spiritual unseen realm. So, yeah.
Beautiful. This is the second time this week I've heard that name, John Money. I think it was, and I don't know a lot about him at all.
Mm, mm.
It must have been, I was watching the documentary, What is a
What is a
Woman?
woman? Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. And that's where he came
He's
in.
also mentioned in some books that women have written. I believe he's also mentioned in Louise Perry's book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, and
Okay.
such texts. Yeah.